On the 7th of October 1649 in Spain, King Philip IV marries a girl. There were a whole lot of problems with this marriage, because not only was he 44 and she was 14, but this little girl was his niece. Yes, you heard that right. The story you just heard sounded very normal for that time, because there was a whole lot of marriages happening all over the world between family members. Marriages like this especially took place in royal families and extremely wealthy ones as well. Like one of the most famous families that is known to inbreed is the Rothschild family. They believe if you don't get any strangers into this family, nothing will make us collapse. These types of marriages and having kids over and over created a whole lot of problems. Problems with genes, sicknesses, and of course, the way the person looks. If you go into ancient times, it gets even worse. Like in ancient Greece, people used to marry their sisters. Even their almighty god Zeus, which is the most important god in Greek mythology, married his sister Hera. Like for example in the Persian Empire, marriages like this was completely illegal. And when the Roman Empire came along, they made this type of marriage illegal as well. But marriages between cousins were always happening, so the inbreeding problem was still well and alive. These types of marriages between cousins were found everywhere. And some religions, including Judaism and Islam, kind of condoned it and made it even more normal. But this doesn't mean that Christians weren't doing it. They were doing it just as much as them. So in this case, we want to give you an example. A person we all know, Charles Darwin. In the year 1839, Charles Darwin married Emma Wedgwood, which was his cousin. So this shows us that marriages like this was well and alive even 19th century Britain. And the reason they still did it was that they didn't know what types of issues it could cause. Charles Darwin and his wife had 10 children, but 3 of these children died when they were a baby, and the 7 that survived their childhood would have different types of sicknesses. They had a weak immune system, they would easily get sick, and they had genetic problems as well. And this upset Charles Darwin because his healthiest child still had a very weak vision. This made Charles Darwin to think about why this is happening, because he wasn't a normal person and he wasn't gonna let this pass. Between the 10 children Charles Darwin had, only 4 of them surpassed age 50. So the other 6 died before the age of 50, and the ones that did survive weren't able to have children. When Darwin realized that he cannot have grandchildren, he got extremely upset and started to study it. And he has written that his generation will end because of his mistake. But what did he think his mistake was? Marrying and having children with his cousin. You could say Charles Darwin was one of the first people to realize that marrying your cousin is a huge mistake and it could have consequences. It wasn't easy to figure it out because he spent years studying it and running experiments to see what happens. He mainly experimented on different plants. He realized when you breed plants from the same family, they're not as strong as the ones that's bred from different families. And pretty much match this type of test to human beings. And it's interesting to know, even to this day, when they breed different types of plants, they try to avoid to use the same genes to make the plant as strong as possible. This is when Charles Darwin writes, when 2 parents share very close genes, that's going to create a lot of problems for the children they have. He didn't 100% realize why this happens, but he still wrote about it. He even wrote that this happens not only in plants and humans, but all types of animals. After Darwin announced this, different types of scientists got very interested into studying this as well, and they quickly realized that Charles Darwin might be right. And this is when a whole lot of article was printed in Britain notifying people that if you marry close, there's a high chance your baby could have problems. Darwin is very well known because of evolution, but through the end of his life, he was more interested in genetics and why inbreeding is a huge problem. He has written that his parents were cousins and he married his cousin as well, and that's why the 3rd generation after all this inbreeding has a lot of problems. And if this continues on and on, the quality of that gene gets much worse and worse. weak immune systems, and a whole lot of genetic mutations. He pretty much said to make your family tree have as many branches as possible and wide as possible, and not make it a tree log. Basically means the more strangers you have in your family tree, the stronger that tree will be. And if there's too many inbreeding in that family, every gene is connected to one log, and it creates a whole lot of problems. Darwin's experiments pretty much shed some light into this problem, and the years go by and more experiments are ran, the more people realize what is happening. And the more we realize, some countries started to make it not legal, and some places made it even a criminal offense if you do it. This is the map of the world where it's legal and illegal. The red countries like China and most of the US states, it's illegal to marry first cousins. Some of US states that's dark red, it's even a criminal offense if you marry your first cousin, so you could get arrested. The dark blue colors are countries where it's legal to marry your first cousin. Most people don't do this, but it's legal. But let's look at a map where it shows which countries has the most first cousin marriages. The darker the blue, the more cousin marriages happens in those countries. Like for example, Pakistan, Qatar, and Burkina Faso have the highest amount of cousin marriages. More than 50% of the marriages are with their cousins. India 20 to 29% because only the Islamic cultures do it. Afghanistan 40 to 49%. Iran and the similar colors 30 to 39%. Turkey, Egypt, and Algeria 20 to 29%. And the lighter the blue gets, the less marriages between cousins happens. But this map truly shows us that it's mainly between Islamic cultures, and other countries have set this culture aside. As you know, in Britain, there's a huge population of Pakistanis. In the year 2011, the UK ran a study that mainly consisted of Pakistani families. Between 13,500 Pakistani families that live in England, 60% of them have married their cousin. But for British people themselves, only 1% married their cousin. But why did they run a study like this? What were they trying to achieve? Because the babies that had genetic problems when they were born were going up, and they realized that most of these babies are Pakistani babies. 3% of the babies born in the UK are Pakistani babies, but 33% of the babies that have genetic problems when they're born are Pakistanis, but they're only 3% of the population. And this stat shows us how much problems this inbreeding could cause. And that's the reason the British government ran this test. They pretty much tried to inform these families that this is the reason your children might have problems. Because they had to inform them. It's not illegal to do such thing, but it's good to inform people that this could happen. You have to know that two cousins share 12% of their DNA, and this is quite high. And if these cousin marriages happen over and over after generation, the gene share is gonna get higher and higher, causing even more problems. Like the father's parents were cousins, the mother's parents were cousins, they have a child, and that child marries their cousin. So the genetic pool has a lot of problems when this happens over and over. So it's no longer 12% anymore. You have to know that siblings share 50% of their DNA with one another. So 12% is not low whatsoever. And the higher the percent is, the more problems the child could have. It was our duty to share this information with you all, and it might upset some cultures and some people. Please let us know what you think, or if we missed something, please let us know.